Zilog and Moto here, and we've made it episode 20. It's funny, whenever I go to upload a new episode each week, I look at the statistics for the videos and just kind of marvel that someone, somewhere, is watching these things. Granted, we're not talking a ton of views, but the fact that just say one person decided to check out my Shack Fu video, it really makes me happy. So thanks for all that, and I hope you come back in the future, because I've still got roughly 1,200 of these things to do. The current plan is still to try to crank out one per week, so check back every Monday and there'll probably be a new video posted. Or subscribe and get notified by some crazy YouTube magic. So for today's episode, I'd mentioned previously that during my research for Electronic Arts NHL Hockey, that there was an alternate version released in Europe called imaginatively EA Hockey. As the goal for this channel was always to take a look at every English release for the Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, 32X. That includes all of the Europe exclusives, like Basketball Nightmare that we covered in episode 8. EA Hockey isn't a particularly expensive title, so while it's still hockey season, the Stanley Cup Final is ending this week, and while NHL Hockey was still fresh in my mind, I went ahead and picked up a copy. And here's where the adventure began. I wasn't expecting this video to be very long, as EA Hockey is essentially just a reskinning of NHL Hockey, as Electronic Arts didn't have the European rights to the NHL license at the time, similar to how the European version of Lakers vs. Celtics became such an incredibly rare title. If you haven't heard that story, you should look it up, but suffice it to say, if you have an in-box European copy of Lakers vs. Celtics, congratulations, you have the rarest Genesis Mega Drive game aside from Tetris. But anyway, back to EA Hockey. I got the game in and popped it into my Genesis, and immediately I knew it wasn't quite right. Now, I'm very familiar with the difference between PAL and NTSC, and I really didn't research into whether the Master System was region locked. It's not. So I assumed that the Master System console controlled whether a game played back in 50 Hz versus 60 Hz, depending on whether it was a PAL or NTSC system. And this same logic carried through the Genesis, as I'd already played a few out-of-region games in my Genesis without any modding. Well, it turns out this isn't exactly true. In a Twitter conversation with fellow YouTuber Dari Plays, she set me straight on the region freeness of the Genesis, and I thank her for that. I'd been confused because she was happy about the ability of the analog Mega SG to play all region titles, and I didn't understand why this was a big deal. Well, it turns out that me being a dumbass was causing two problems. One, as she correctly stated, there is region locking on the Genesis Mega Drive, but this usually only applied to games released after 1992 or so, and even then, not across the board. This caused me to do a bit of research and find out that even if I didn't have a fancy Mega SG, as long as I had a Game Genie, there were codes out there that masked the region locking and allowed me to play the game as normal. However, this only solved the first problem. Second problem that I found out when testing EA Hockey is that due to the difference between PAL and NTSC, is that if a developer is doing a proper job, they will convert the cart to run at a proper frame rate for that region. And that's the reason why I hadn't run this problem before, is because the international carts I tested previously were either designed with NTSC in mind and not converted to run in PAL, or that they ran slightly faster being a PAL cart running in NTSC mode, but I didn't notice because I didn't have an original to compare it to. Well, being familiar with NHL Hockey from just having done the review, I noticed. And as soon as you boot up the cartridge, you can immediately tell the intro music is sped up from normal, an annoying effect I've noticed when playing PAL DVDs on an NTSC DVD player. But that didn't bother me too much. What did bother me was the frenetic speed of the players on the ice. It's similar to playing Street Fighter II Turbo versus vanilla Street Fighter. And now I realize this is potentially going to be an issue with all the European carts I was planning on picking up. So now I'm thinking, alright, what do I do? I can't review the game like this. Do I buy a PAL Mega Drive? Do I drop a bunch of money and go the Daria Plays route and pick up Mega SG? Or is there a way to make this work with what I have now? Well, it turns out if you have a Model 1 Genesis, there is a method that solves all these problems. I just happen to have a backup Genesis, and as you can see here, it now has a switch inside of it. The switch has 3 positions, and with just 3 wires soldered to the motherboard, I now have a multi-region Genesis/Mega Drive that can now be switched between Europe, North American, and Japan to natively support what game I'm playing. This will also switch the Genesis between PAL and NTSC mode, so that PAL or NTSC games will play as they were originally intended. Now that I've solved the problem of how to play the game properly, let's take a look at the two games together to see how they compare. Alright, here are NHL Hockey and EA Hockey together. And you can tell immediately they went with a different picture on the cover. I'm pretty certain the two teams on the EA Hockey cover are still NHL teams, that they've just erased any team logos. The actual hockey logo is the same. You can see here, just spun it at an angle. And the NHL emblem is removed and replaced with EA. So if you notice, there's still the exact same circles. They just swapped that out and dropped in that EA there. Also, if you look at the From the Team box, here, from the team that brought you John Madden Football. Here, from the team that brought you John Madden American Football, which I thought was pretty interesting. Then if you check the Electronic Arts label on NHL Hockey, it's got the EA Sports moniker up here at the top. And then instead on EA Hockey, down here at the bottom, you've got Electronic Arts with the square and the circle and the triangle. More of this logo they used more in Europe. If you flip the boxes over, you'll see NHL Hockey has a much better looking back cover. It just has more details and everything. EA Hockey, they were only able to put in 3 screenshots here, as opposed to all the details and everything they had here. And that's due to the fact that on these Euro games, they always put everything into 6 different languages. So basically, everything that's taken up here is just 3 sentences translated 6 ways. From the actual box perspective, you'll notice the NHL Hockey has a previously discussed sort of thick clamshell, as opposed to not the standard one. EA Hockey uses more of a standard one, as far as the width and everything. But if you look closely, it's not exactly like the ones in the US, because this cover here, see how on here, the cover, even though this is a thicker one, this plastic outer covering has kind of got this texture to it. On here, you don't have that texture. It's very smooth, clear plastic, and then on the sides as well, it's a very smooth, clear plastic. Whereas usually on the Genesis clamshell cases, they're more thick and textured. As we open the boxes, we'll see a difference, because you've got the standard sort of Electronic Arts manual here versus here. This is a full book manual, so look how thick that is. And it's laid out in portrait mode, similar to how Basketball Nightmare was, if you watch that video. However, in the Master System games, you had 6 columns, and each of the 6 was a different language. Here, what they decided to do, if you look at the front of the manual, you got 3 languages here, and then when you flip it over, you've got 3 languages here. So the first half, these is 3 languages, these are the same 3 languages. And then, if you want to look at the other languages, you flip it over, and there you go. There's more or less the same information that's in here is what's in here. It's just laid out differently. Unfortunately, denser, so a little bit more textbook-like. One last funny thing I found was that if you look at the cover of EA Hockey, I'm going to just slide this back in here. Down here at the bottom says for the Sega Mega Drive, and then here for play on the Sega Mega Drive system. But if you look at the actual cartridge, and both of these cartridges look very similar, but down here at the bottom it says for use with the Sega Genesis system, just like it says on NHL Hockey. Like the label is almost identical on the cartridge. My guess is that all these yellow tab cartridges were just made at the same factory in Taiwan, and they made a mistake doing these labels. It's a minor thing, but it'll make you think, it really would have been simpler if Sega just called the console the same thing in all regions, rather than splitting the regions with the Mark III versus the Master System and then the Mega Drive versus the Genesis. Now that we've exhausted the outer differences between the games, let's take a look at the actual game and compare it to NHL Hockey and see if there's anything really worth mentioning. So if you really want a thorough review of EA Hockey, you should probably just go back and watch episode 17 if you haven't already, as this will be more of a quick view of the game and just point out where it differs from NHL Hockey. Having said that, the first thing that you'll notice when you boot the game up is if you're playing it in PAL mode, it plays at the proper speed, but the image appears squashed. This is apparently common on PAL games that are originally designed for NTSC, as PAL resolution is taller than NTSC. So since the NTSC designed image doesn't take up a full PAL screen, you're left with extra dead space. If it wasn't for the speed difference, it actually would be preferable to play the game in NTSC mode, because then the image displays as full height. This is something that you get used to after a bit, but it's still not pleasant and must have sucked for PAL gamers back in the day. Just for a quick comparison, you've been watching the game in PAL mode. Now here's the game running on the same Genesis, but in NTSC mode. You can immediately see the visual difference with the unsquashed image. The speed difference may not be immediately noticeable, but from a play perspective, the game is much more difficult, as the game's physics rely on the skater's momentum on the ice, and having the game run quicker makes it that much more difficult to be precise with your location on the ice, or react when the opponent has the puck and is getting into shooting position. Other than these visual differences, the main difference between the two games is the removal of the NHL license, and the replacement of the NHL named teams with international teams. However, it doesn't really seem like the teams were replaced as much as they were relabeled. The reason why I say this is I started out testing the game by playing a game of the United States versus the Soviet Union? Yep, that's how old this game is, as it was released in Europe in August of 1991, and the breakup of the Soviet Union wouldn't occur until Christmas that year. Anyway, back to what I was saying. I start an exhibition game between the US and the Soviet Union, which is for some reason labeled as regular season in the game menu. Don't know why that wasn't changed. And the first Soviet line has players with numbers 55, 66, and 77, and the second line has a player with number 68. Those numbers coincidentally are the numbers of Larry Murphy, Mario Lemieux, Paul Coffey, and Jaromir Jagr from the Pittsburgh Penguins that year. So with a bit of research, it appears that you could probably go through the game and figure out which teams in EA Hockey were originally the teams in NHL, as it seems like there was no effort made to actually change the structure of the teams, merely match up strong teams in the NHL with strong international counterparts. Unfortunately, since NHL EA Hockey doesn't feature any kind of roster management, this is something that will require playing games as all the teams in both games and comparing notes, which I certainly didn't have time for, but would make an interesting project for someone to make a FAQ or video about, if they were so inclined. The game itself is unchanged from NHL Hockey. Fans in the stands are the same, the rink is the same, with the home team's flag replacing team logos in center ice, and the play is the same, with all the same penalties and fight potential. International Hockey is technically played on wider rinks than the ones the NHL uses, but that would have required altering the game, so it wasn't included. The game's options are the same as well. You can either play the computer in one-on-one in an exhibition match, team up with a second player, or play one-on-one,
Or you can go into either single game elimination or best of 7 elimination tournaments to win the EA Cup. And when you do this, you'll pick the team you want to play as, and the computer will automatically match you up with a first round opponent. The tournaments feature password save functionality, such as same as NHL hockey. But I've got to say, with the squash screen, it was a little harder to read what the password was. However, tournament mode does have one large glitch that isn't present in NHL hockey. If you remember, NHL hockey features 22 current at the time NHL teams, along with the two 1991 All-Star teams, for a total of 24 teams. EA Hockey only has 22 international teams. The All-Star teams aren't selectable in tournament mode in NHL Hockey for obvious reasons. When you go to tournament mode in EA Hockey, the United States and Yugoslavia, the two last teams in the list, are not selectable. It's my guess that whatever programming that NHL Hockey had to not allow you to select the All-Star teams for tournament mode was mistakenly carried over to EA Hockey and was applied to the last two teams in the list, which just so happened to be the US and Yugoslavia, alphabetically. This is a pretty big bummer if you want to play as either of those two teams, and it's hard to believe this bug made it past the QA. But I guess they were focusing on the teams that they figured more Europeans would pick. I have one last gripe, and it's somewhat inexplicable. When the team flags and colors were brought into the game, for the most part they did a pretty good job, especially with the player uniforms. For instance, Sweden really looks like Sweden. However, any team with red in their flag has that red turned into a weird brownish orange color instead, and I can't fathom why this is. From the game footage featured here, you can see Poland and Russia. Their uniforms look appropriately red, and there's plenty of red in the background of the game as well. So why the flags and logos get screwed up? At first, I thought it was a problem with a mod that I did to make the game run in PAL mode, or maybe an issue with my TV set. But nope, that's just the way it is. I can't imagine this was intentional, so it just seems like another way in which the game must have been rushed through the conversion process. As far as rating the game goes, I know I originally gave NHL Hockey a 4-star rating, and that EA Hockey is essentially the same game, but I'm docking the game a star, and instead only giving it 3 this time around. The ugly team flags and logos and the inexplicable tournament bug dragged the game down, and there was no real effort made to make this game stand out on its own. EA Hockey is an interesting curiosity, but there's really no reason to seek it out, unless you have a system capable of playing PAL games properly, and you just really want to duke it out with former Soviet republics that no longer exist.
And that was EA Hockey, Electronic Arts' attempt to salvage the release of NHL Hockey in Europe after not being able to get the international rights sorted out in time. Well, I didn't really get anything new out of playing the game itself, since it was the same game. The whole thing was a nice learning experience, and now I have a multi-region capable Genesis to boot that I can use later on for PAL games or the few Japanese-only releases I wanted to track down, like Double Dragon 2 and Bare Knuckle 3. And now I don't have to answer the question of why do you have an extra Genesis laying around? Tune in next time as we venture back to the Sega CD and see what happens when you mix full motion video, the director of Marked for Death, Aliens, and Texas. Yeah, I don't know about this one either. And remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.